Men, welcome to one more round. Today we begin round one. Our focus for this week is perspective. Perspective is a powerful tool. I cannot tell you how many times in my life that perspective has played such a significant role in allowing me to understand what God was doing in people and in moments and in circumstances. Not necessarily in that time, but when I get further down the road and I'm able to look back and see how God was orchestrating various details of my life, how He had moving pieces in place. Sometimes people that were immediately in my life, and sometimes people that may have came into my life at a later time. But I'm able to look back with a fresh perspective and realize God was in the details of our life. I want to encourage you to write that word somewhere where you can see it. Maybe you write it right over the text that we're going to study today. Maybe you write it on a card somewhere that you put it in your truck or locker or somewhere where you work or get ready for the day. Keep that word in front of you. Perspective, it's a powerful tool, especially when we understand that our perspective is not always accurate, but God's perspective is. You see, in the life of David, as we start this study in 1 Samuel 16, it actually begins far beyond that. Actually, years before that, when Saul is crowned the king of Israel, the first king of Israel. Israel had cried out for a king. They wanted what everyone else had. They said, we want a king to rule over us. We want a king to judge us. We want a king to fight our battles for us. They had that king. It was God. But God told Samuel, who was a prophet at the time, He said, listen, they have not rejected you. They've rejected me. So Samuel warns them, this is what's going to happen if you get a king. And Israel said, we don't care. We want a king. And they get Saul. Truthfully, Saul starts off as a pretty good king. He has a pretty good heart, and the people around him are noticing a difference in him as God has given him a new heart. And he had the Spirit upon him, and God's using him in incredible ways. But there's a slow descent that begins to take place. 1 Samuel 13, Jonathan's fighting a battle, and Jonathan defeats some Philistines, and Saul somehow gets credit for it. It's subtle, but it becomes significant. Later on in 1 Samuel 13, the Philistines have risen up against the Israelites, and the Israelites are hiding in caves and tombs and everywhere they can hide. And Saul's waiting for Samuel to show up, and after a week, he doesn't show up. So Saul offers sacrifices to the Lord. He's king, he's not priest. That's not his jurisdiction. That's not his area. And Samuel calls him out for that. But what really happens, what's really significant, is in 1 Samuel chapter 15, God had told Saul, I want you to go and I want you to wipe out the Amalekites. You see, back in Exodus chapter 17, the Amalekites attacked the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel is in its infancy. They have literally just walked out of Egypt as slaves. God is leading them across the desert floor, and the Amalekites see what they believe is an easy target. Well, in Exodus chapter 17, God says, I will wipe the Amalekites off of the face of the earth. Well, He tells Saul, Saul, I want you to go and I want you to destroy them. I want you to completely wipe them out. Well, Saul doesn't do that. Saul, again, this descent just keeps going lower and lower. He spares the king, King Agag, for some reason. He keeps some of the livestock that was good and that was pleasing. And when Samuel walks back, he's like, what is this noise that I hear? And Saul's like, oh, blessed be the Lord. And Samuel says, stop. You need to stop. You have disobeyed God. Samuel goes on to tell Saul, God is tearing the kingdom from you. That God has raised up someone else who's going to take your place. Well, if you're a king of anything, if you're a leader of anything, you don't want to believe that somebody is ever going to take your spot. Someone is ever going to take your seat. Saul does everything he can to try to keep a tight grip on the reign and rule of the nation of Israel. But God's perspective is always absolutely accurate. And God is raising up someone that's going to be that king. And that's where we meet David in 1 Samuel 16. Samuel had to cut up King Agag, and he cut him into pieces. Agag came out and thought, well, certainly all is good now. They're going to forget about it. Samuel knew that God wanted him destroyed. He knew God wanted Agag and all that belonged to him destroyed, so he had to take matters into his own hands. Well, in 1 Samuel 16, God says, "How long are you going to grieve over Saul? Get up. I'm going to send you to the place where you're going to anoint the next king of Israel." As Samuel is on his way to Bethlehem, the elders of the city are there. They see him and they say, "Do you come peaceably?" He says, "Yeah, I come peaceably." You know, they knew that Samuel had incredible authority and power, and certainly they had heard about him cutting up King Agag, and they want to make sure his trip he's on, it's all good. Well, they bring out Jesse, and they bring out his sons, and that's where we pick up in our text today. We'll start in verse 6. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel, and he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." And Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Israel. Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen these." Then Samuel said to Jesse, "Are all your sons here?" And he said, "There remains yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep." So Jesse brings out all of his sons. The first one walks up, Eliab, and Samuel believes that's it. He looks like a king. When he walks in, you say, that is king material. You walk into a bank, you say, I think he's the president. You walk into a church, you go, I think he's an elder. You walk into a business, say, I think he owns the place, right? Like you just have this idea in your mind, this person fits the description that I think should fit a king. Now, in fairness, if you've ever had to pick somebody for a position, you know at some point you have to present them. If you've hired a staff, if you hired an employee, whatever, at some point you say, this is our person, and you know that it's going to impact other people. Well, Samuel looks at Eliab and knows that he's going to have to wheel out the second king of Israel in just a handful of years. The people are going to respond. So he looks at him and God says, that's not the one. That doesn't necessarily mean Eliab was wicked or evil. God just says, no, that's not the one I'm raising up to be the next king of Israel. I have somebody in mind. They keep going down the list. Nope. Finally, Samuel asked Jesse, you got anybody else? God has said no to all these sons. He said, I got one more, but he's out there keeping sheep. Now, if you're David, what's your perspective right now? How do you feel about this? Maybe a different question. Have you ever been overlooked? Have you ever been cut out of the conversation? Has there ever been a meeting or a gathering or a road trip or anything of that nature and you say, I felt left out. They didn't include me. They didn't even invite me. Well, here's a feast, and Jesse, for whatever reason, doesn't even find it worthy that David should even show up. I mean, he's not thinking he's going to put him up there to be a future king, but he didn't even call him in for being a shepherd of the sheep to take care of them, to come in to be a part of the sacrifice. Samuel says, go get him. We will not sit down until he shows up. Let's read on. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome, and the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward, and Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. We have the next king of Israel. If you're the brothers, that's got to sting a little bit. If you're Jesse, you kind of have an uncomfortable moment, don't you, as the father? If you're David, boy, that's a pretty cool moment. Here you went from the guy that wasn't even invited to be at the feast to being the next king of Israel. Now here's the tension. What did David do that night after he was anointed king of Israel? He went back to the sheep. He didn't move into the palace. He didn't say, scoot over, Saul. You got 30 days to get your stuff out of here. And, I got some things I want to change in this place. No, he went back to taking care of sheep. This is important because oftentimes when we feel the stirring of God in our life, when we feel this call or excitement that I want to do more, I want to be more, I want to experience more, oftentimes there is a waiting period. For David, it's going to be about a 15-year waiting period. For Noah, it was about 100 years. For Moses, it was about 80 years. For Abraham and Sarah and Hannah and Rachel and countless others who waited decades to have children. For Jesus, there was a 30-year period from birth to his public ministry. Oftentimes, God is doing something in that waiting. And if we're not careful, our perspective will start to shift. And we'll say, I feel overlooked. David wasn't overlooked. He was anointed. But he had to allow that development to take place. Oh, there's a lot of things that are going to happen in David's life. And if you know the story, you know what I'm talking about. But it wasn't time to be the king yet. The anointing was upon him. God's Spirit was upon him. God is going to tell an incredible story through the life of David, but he's not going to be the king right now. Perspective is a powerful tool. If you're Samuel, you have to feel some excitement, yet nervousness, knowing that you got to go back to Saul. He's erratic. The more paranoid he's becoming, the more out of control he's becoming. If you're the brothers of David, it's got to sting a little bit. If you're Jesse, you got to be excited and yet still a little bit uncomfortable. And if you're David, I got to believe that night as he goes to take care of those sheep, as he still feels kind of on the outs with his brothers, I got to believe he looks up at the sky, stares at the stars, looks at the moon, and I got to believe his perspective is starting to shift just a little bit. As we said in the beginning, men, perspective is a powerful tool. And I don't know where you're at in life. And I don't know what brought you to this conversation you're going to have right now. And I don't know what your week is like, and I don't know what your next week is like, but I know this, we all have a perspective. We need to pause long enough and ask ourselves, not what is my perspective of this situation, what is God's perspective of the situation? You see, God is orchestrating countless details in the life of David, and I believe he's orchestrating countless details in your life as well. And men, when we go to bed at night and we get up in the morning, we ask ourselves, God, I want your perspective. And men, when you have God's perspective, it will give you the focus, it will give you the fire to get up and fight one more round.